Actually, oh, sorry. I was convinced that I was with, oops, thank you so much. I hope that you have understood my voice even before. Thank you. So it's louder, of course, much better, yes. You're right. We used some keywords. As you can see, aging workforce, older worker, star, aging employee, aging workforce, aging employee, star. And we used both words, aging and aging, because, of course, we consider that different words are used, different spelling is used depending on the cultural setting, and therefore we preserved both spelling. The documents, of course, the considered documents were articles, book chapters, reviews in the subject area of business, management, accounting, social sciences, economics, econometrics, and finance, psychology, and all the papers, all the texts were in English. As you can see, we were very broad in our analysis. And this is the first result, the main path analysis. What is the main path? It is a system of connected papers that are related by citations. We are able to see where the topic stemmed from and the last results. As you can see, there are some points that are located in 2018, 2021, 2022, and they are the arriving point of a stream of research. So through the main path analysis, we can understand who generates new knowledge and who uses this knowledge. What is the tradition of the research on this topic? And we consider also the cluster analysis, which is the analysis of the clusters of keywords used by the authors. We took into consideration 413 pieces of research, and we analyzed the co-occurrence network, considering only keywords that appear together at least 5 times. The result is a network of 42 keywords that are grouped in clusters. Keyword clusters and community are analyzed to identify the research trajectories and traditions and describe the relevant publications. The cluster analysis of keywords examines the group as thematic sets reflecting the main direction of research in the literature regarding the aging workforce. We found 8 clusters that we grouped into 4 main groups, general groups. And especially the first one was dealing with the inclusion of older workers in organization. Then we have another macro cluster dealing with the physical and mental health of older workers. The third macro cluster deals with the HRM and job satisfaction of older workers. And then the last one deals with the flexibility of organizational policies. Why cluster analysis is so important? Because it helps us to understand what are the main gaps in the literature. It highlights what has been studied till now, but also it allows us to understand where to go and deepen our knowledge of the topic. And therefore, we found that at least 3 main aspects are very, very important and have been disregarded up to now. First of all, emerging technologies, the impact of AI and automation on senior employees. Research seems to be unsatisfactory up to now, and therefore we need to go in depth. The second point is intersectional diversity. That is, we need to study age, gender, disability, sexual orientation together with age and understand the intertwining aspects of these diversity trends. And then we need to explore how flexible work agreement impact on productivity and well-being of aging workforce. These are the three main aspects that we found to be not satisfactorily dealt with in the present literature. Another point, very important, how to define older workers. This is not just out of curiosity. This is much more, because we have different approaches. There are at least three approaches: the chronological approach, the functional approach, and the psychological approach. The first one is not satisfactory because it is based on the number of age. However, this approach is challenged because it is not related to the real capabilities of the person, of course. And then we can use the functional approach, which focuses on capabilities, adaptability, performance, rather than chronological age, offering a more flexible and complete view of the person. Then we have the psychological view, a third approach, which is focused on cognitive aspects, and of course, it's much more related to functionality. The chronological aspect is one of the most used, but of course, it is not a clear point, a clear concept, because there are different epistemological perspectives. In psychology, from 45, you are an old worker. So it's very concerning. Then if you look at sociology, they are more generous, 50 years old. And then if you are in the domain of labor policies and economics in general government, of course, 60 years old and more, because we have to support the welfare state. So it's a different viewpoint, but of course, this does not allow us to use the chronological criterion in an effective way. Okay, so let's go to the key findings, and then I wrap up. First of all, we need to emphasize the importance of age management strategies to cope with this topic. Emphasize flexible work arrangement, continuous training, and reskilling programs to adapt to evolving workforce needs. But why? Because the workforce is shrinking, the young workforce is shrinking, and of course we need to support companies with the capabilities, with the competencies, and of course to let companies be competitive in the worldwide market. Therefore, there is another point: flexible work arrangements, part-time roles, bridge employment, they improve the capability of aging workforce to stay at work and increase the job satisfaction and retention rates. These arrangements also enhance health perceptions and reduce absenteeism. This means also that the older workers can be good mentors for young people. So we can have a sort of reciprocal benefit. Young workers and older workers can benefit each other. And then we should look at HR practices, because we need to have HR integrated approaches, such as training programs and intergenerational mentoring, promote inclusion and enhance the workability of older employees. Another point before leaving my presentation, we need to customize interventions to meet the diverse workforce needs. It is not possible to use a one-size-fits-all measure because, of course, we need to grasp the best of the capabilities and of the characteristics of each person in the job market. Concluding, there is a red thread that put together the different topics that I have presented to you. First of all, from empowering older workers as sources of experience, innovation, and resilience, towards building inclusive workplaces through flexible policies and lifelong learning programs in order to shape the future of our society through resilient companies, of course, and paving the way for a sustainable growth. And of course, this is also important for driving policy innovation and create a future-ready organization. Thank you very much. There is...
Okay, well, thank you, Professor Minelli, for this presentation and for this paper, which is very timely. As the data you presented tell us, Italy has a big problem with aging workforce. We are in Italy now, but Europe overall. And especially it has serious consequences on topics such as, for example, intergenerational exchange, which is something that we are studying as a community right now in Italy in particular. So I read your paper, which I found very interesting. And I liked the fact that you had both the methodologies for literature review, so both systematical and then the analysis. And what I asked myself after reading all of the paper is, so given that you provide a fragmentation for the definition of older workers, how can a company decide who should they provide specific arrangement towards? You know, because you stress the importance of not having a one-size-fits-all approach. So, for example, if we were to implement a more inclusive, age-related inclusive approach into organizations, who are the aging workforce? How can a company define that? And then I find it very interesting, and I think the solution is into intersectionality, which is one of your point for research gaps. Because, for example, to be ill and to be old is very different to be healthy and to be old. And then again, how do we define ill? And then I find it very interesting that you stress the importance of flexible work arrangement, training, and intergenerational mentoring as policies. I feel like maybe there might be some insight also on the topics of performance management, for example. How can we fix it to make it more inclusive for older people? And well-being programs in general, because to older people, health is one of the most connected domain of identity to age. So yes, all of this. And then I found that in the introduction, you stress the importance of stereotypes, but then maybe I don't find it as much later in the paper. So these two, and I think overall is very important to stress, as you did in this presentation, the importance of customizing HRM practices to make them more inclusive, because we are facing an older and older workforce. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your suggestions and observations. They are another paper, but it's very, very interesting. Well, first of all, you are right. We need to take into consideration many aspects in dealing with the real practices that we need to put in practice in the company. First of all, an intersectional approach is very important. But I dare say that there is also the need to take into consideration the sector. Of course, working in the university is not to work into the building a building company and so on. So it means that, or in a mechanical company, it means that we need to take into consideration the real practical aspects of the job. And therefore, I think that we needed to work more on applied science also, not just on theoretical aspects. This is a huge problem, and I suspect that there is no enough awareness among managers, among practitioners, consultants, for instance, and also the government, politicians. I think that we should bring our research to a different level, to be more communicative outside our academy, outside our universities. We need to talk with the common people, to managers, and to let them understand that welfare passes through inclusion, because otherwise we cannot support our standards of life. And this is a very, very important aspect that I don't know how to do it, but I feel that it is the way we can cope with this point. Then you asked me about, sorry, I was nodding because I agreed with you, but yes, performance management. Yes, this is another huge aspect, an enormous gap in, especially in the Italian organizations, because performance management is typical of large firms, large companies. They have the competencies to build structured practices, performance management practices. In Italy, normally, performance management is equal to control, management control, which is not the same, of course. And this is a problem because companies lose the resources that older people or diverse people bring to the company. But performance management is something different. This is another very important point that we need to make people aware of. And then, thank you very much. We did not stress the aspect of stereotypes. They should be included, at least in the conclusion, better in the conclusion. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Well, thank you. I believe this was really a very interesting and deep analysis on the topic. I was sharing with you, I'm also doing research on a similar matter. But I am also aware of something else, especially related to countries that are not necessarily in the developed area as a whole, especially when you consider, for example, the healthcare system in many countries. That is something that can be pretty challenging, especially because it's not granted for everybody. So probably you may want to consider that, and I'm happy to connect with you, because when to publish something, probably we can collaborate. I'm happy and open to collaborate. But also I want to underline something that you mentioned in terms of how to define who is the aging person. I made a note also for myself that is also a very important consideration.
Thank you very much for your suggestions. I take note, of course, because I think that I overlooked these aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Liana. Thank you. Now I would,
Okay, perfect.
sorry, we are running out of time, so I would request my second presenter to present in the session.
All right. Good morning to everybody. I'm going to present a conceptual paper. This is about the sexual liberation market and how it could help us to re-envision and reappreciate the LGBT contribution, SME's contribution to economy and its value creation. I'm going to have there are going to be three important and major phases in my presentation. Right? Okay. In my presentation, I'm going to organize it according to three phases. In the first phases, I'm going to briefly try to explain how LGBTQ plus entrepreneurship has been reduced to a refuge. This is a term that I've coined 5 years ago, saying that it's extremely limited to identity, person, individuals, and it's entirely forgetting, well, the business in many regards. I'm a professor of strategy, so for me it's an important issue at some point, but also I think it's misleading in many regards. But we're not going to enter this kind of debate and controversy, but I'm pretty much not sharing it. Then I'm going to try briefly to explain you how this LGBT business has been developed since the early 19th century, but I'm going to go through very quickly. And then the third phase will be really to address what can we understand about SLM today, and how we can try to reappreciate what it means in terms of value creation and also interconnection with different sectors, not only sex and entertainment. It goes much further and much deeper than we can expect. And it's not only a refuge for people, it's also an accomplishment when they create business. And it's important to say it, they get pleasure and accomplishment in doing it. It's not only fearing of being rejected and discriminated. And it's very important, I think, in many regards. Okay, so very briefly, as far as I can see in literature, there's an overemphasis on consumption and also a lack of clear issue concerning value creation, concerning these businesses. And in many regards, there is not a clear exploration of the multi-sectoral implementation of this business too. More importantly also, I think it will be interesting to appreciate the evolution of the LGBTQ plus business models in SMEs. There is only one case that I can identify, and it's not really a direct case about LGBTQ plus business model. It's SOS business, I will refer to it. It's the most important social enterprise in France. 250,000 people are working for it. Initially, it was targeting people who had AIDS and were addicted to camps and drugs. So it was really an intersectional kind of business that was created early 90s, very original. It shows that, and it's now covering several kinds of sectors of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. So it's a very interesting piece of evidence that we have to go much deeper in the analysis we offer today to our students and to our colleagues as scholars. As I said initially, we shouldn't dichotomize individual versus organizations as a little mistake, and we should adopt a phenomenological approach of LGBTQ plus entrepreneurship. I refer to Deleuze and Guattari when they talk about schizophrenia in Mille Plateau when they say, okay, you know, well, there was the Lacanian school. In the Lacanian school, we understood beyond Freud what was about madness and what was about schizophrenia. If you miss your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, whatever. Anyway, a set of individual actors. Well, maybe it was very misleading. And then Deleuze and Guattari really wrote this wonderful book. If you have not read it, really, I encourage you to explore it, saying like, well, try to imagine what it would be when you are into schizophrenia, a person without organ, a body without organ. And they try to really say, forget to think about psychology, think about body. Think about body, and that's somehow my movement. I want to think about the flesh of business, the body of the business, rather than saying discriminated people are discriminated, therefore they are entrepreneurs. Okay. What do I mean through that? It's one of the initial paper I've tried to write in 2012. It was published, trying to show how the sexual liberation market means for these businesses. I was trying to contradict the first paper that was written by Shinde Ite and her colleagues. It was a very good paper, but I didn't share at all their point of view that there were entrepreneurs who are LGBT, entrepreneurs who address the LGBT market, entrepreneurs who are LGBT and address the LGBT market. As for me, I don't mind, and I've met many others, many people that way, and it doesn't mean anything in that regard. There is first a major tension between political intention and business intention. I'm a scholar very much involved into motivational issues, a psychosociologist scholar. So for me, I think this is the most important issue in understanding LGBT business, political versus business intention, and how much it's intersect, but also sometimes it breaks up, and it doesn't work very well when you read some paper. So briefly, and you can refer to some of my paper on that. This notion of LGBTQ enterprise as a refuge for entrepreneurs is certainly an inclusive solution. I don't contest it, but it shouldn't be. The study of this kind of business shouldn't be reduced to that. Of course, behind this kind of business, we somehow should explore what is said by marketing and by entrepreneurship, not only by entrepreneurship as a discipline. Of course, most of the things that are said about LGBTQ plus offer is pretty much focused on the concern of big companies. And of course, it's restricted to two dimensions, identity affirmation versus sexual liberation, as it can be seen in literature. We can also, more recently, in the literature of the 2020s, we can observe that, of course, there's a set of other limitations, such as somehow a study primarily on cisgender homosexual population and their business. Somehow, the misunderstanding concerning the meaning of LGBT consumption that is considered as marginalized, but has been also mainstreamized in many regards, if we can consider it in several marketing studies. And of course, the emergence of new identity behaviors. I will address that a little bit later. As far as I think in my conceptual paper, LGBTQ SMEs are the best responder, or the people who offer the best responsiveness to changes in LGBTQ plus demand. Therefore, we should go deeper in what we know. Trying to overview pretty quickly what happened to the LGBTQ business and trying to organize it according to 4 phases. I've not invented it. It's absolutely clear from Brenchik piece of studies from 2002. But I try somehow to mobilize a set of reference. Initially in the 19th century enterprise, this business were a place for socializing and exploring identity and desire. That is pretty clear. Between the 2 world wars, and that's what I want to show, there are progressively a new dimension that appear in this market. First, a sort of research about the way you could be homosexual somewhere else, in another political place, in another cultural place. As we could see through a set of French and German people, French and English people traveling to Germany to see how German homosexual population of that time tried to organize a set of outdoor activities. And This has somehow stimulated this kind of activity after the Second World War. In parallel, in the US, you have also a set of activities that try somehow to industrialize homosexual offer through, for example, YMCAs or Child's Cafeteria. However, after the Second World War, there was a strict, large wave of repression, as we can see through the different kinds of regulation that were not very much upon. Therefore, in the 70s, we could see a set of business that were much more turned on trying to adjust or articulate, on the one side, the business development, and on the other side, the political contestation, as it is illustrated in Stonewall in 1969, but also, and Stonewall has a great implication in the building up of the concept of village, the village, that can be somehow deconstructed today. In parallel, there is a very interesting event that happened in France. Le Front Homosexuel d'Action Révolutionnaire invaded the studio of important radio called RTL, that was having a topic, the homosexuality is this very painful problem, you know, a very beautiful kind of title for the 1960s, and they were entering it and making a total crazy things, like trying to make a total mess of this program. Consequence and implication in terms of sectoral development of that once LGBT people got somehow recognition in France, they were somehow trying to control media and media activities and developing a set of media alternative activities, such as Geneviève Pastre, a very famous lesbian writer, who created a set of free radio libre, called as FG Radio, that is a reference for young people today, and they were somehow very active in that respect. Nothing in literature is mentioning that in terms of business, and this genealogy, this business genealogy is totally ignored. It's wonderful. Okay, AIDS crisis. This is a moment of heavy social enterprise. No paper about that. Bravo. Like a total silence in that. I'm not going to enter into that, but there was a time where Chamber of Commerce, Gay Chamber of Commerce managed to organize themselves, and we're going to do things in parallel. AIDS and ACT UPs were somehow appearing. This is social entrepreneurship. Why such a silence about that? Why? That's crazy, and it's still alive. Further development of LGBTQ entrepreneurship in several areas, especially in high-tech, and there are a set of very interesting issues. Well, I'm not going to go into detail, but I just mentioned Martine Rodenblatt and United Therapeutics in 1994. She has developed, because he's a transgender person, a very interesting set of biotech businesses that were somehow exploring aging as a queer person over time, but also she created with his family and her partner, a transhumanist foundation called Terrasem. So it's also another way of enterprise. Except journalism, no one in academia is interested in that, okay? C'est la vie. We should say, why such a silence? How can we understand the customer phenomenon of sexual liberation before returning to, how can we understand the demand before returning to the understanding of entrepreneurship? That's somehow my concern as a scholar of entrepreneurship. I should somehow embrace the task of my colleagues in marketing. Well, first, there's a first issue. We should somehow address a clear historical understanding of the evolution of what we call sexual liberation market. There was something that was built up progressively from 19th century to 1970s, 80s. However, at some points, there were somehow many other things that happened, and we should somehow try to understand. We should then deconstruct the notion of sexual liberation. What does it mean? And it's very important. Here, I've done a sort of, well, pretty much complex, or not that complex, somehow try to understand how much and I was influenced by a very interesting reading, well, I think one of the most important texts about understanding sexuality, Histoire de la Sexualité, the Tom 2, the chapter Flesh and Gender, that was published in 1976, in which Foucault was pretty much stressing how much, since the mid-16th century and the reform, or Western culture was pretty much imposing a sort of self-confession dynamic. And this self-confession dynamic was somehow an important opportunity for the LGBTQ plus community, especially after the Stonewall event, which was somehow addressing at the same time the importance of localization, the village. Here we are located in that space, but also that was somehow I consume, therefore I am. So that was also addressing consumption. So there is a sort of broad consumerist consumption that was describing these kinds of market somehow, that gave somehow the power to have the rights of boycott, but at the same time that developed itself through a confessional media culture and struggle for equality of rights that is pretty much controversized by a very beautiful book written by Naz in 2017, and that has inspired me. It ends up in what we call homonormativity. The sexual liberation market is pretty much aligned with this notion of homonormativity that is contradicted by several papers, very critically, showing that, of course, there is first what we should call un complexe du village, the village complex, and geographers and urbanists are pretty much obsessed by that. It's a pity they don't see any other things, but well, c'est la vie aussi. No account of any other activities and non-commercial exchange of services, no comprehensive studies of the virtual dimension of the LGBTQ plus village. There's not anymore anyone in the bar, cafes, saunas today because everybody's on apps. Let's not forget about it. Okay, what is a village when there's nobody? I don't know, okay? We have written about that with one of my best colleagues, Olivier Mokadem, in 2021, okay? And of course, the whole point also is trying to understand how we locate the offering of major large firms that are following the homonormative trend versus maybe smaller business who try to explore and adjust and adapt and even invent new dimension. What is the reality of the LGBTQ plus demand today? It's certainly deep-rooted in contestation. For example, I think I give some further example. Yes, well, I'm using, for example, how these two big sectors such as pharma and medcare are somehow associated with LGBTQ plus businesses. However, there's a set of transgression in that regard. I would refer to the book by Paul Preciado, it's almost finished, that Intesto Junkie, that shows how you can use hormone of transformation just for the pleasure of experimentation and not as a medicine. Somehow there's a set of very interesting transgression. Reading this book is also very important. Sorry. Two perspectives I want to offer here. First, of course, to re-understand this SLM issue, first try to introduce a paradigm of identity confession, as we have seen it. That is certainly not clearly exploited, to see what are the connections between SLM and the media culture. That's important. And of course, the experiential dimension and the possibility to transform yourself as another person with another identity through several kinds of intersectionalities, intersectional dimension, through rebelling, hijacking, and several types of issues. Another paradigm that we should be able to mobilize to understand better the LGBTQ plus SLM is somehow something that has borrowed from my marketing colleagues and that is inspired by the schema of Holbrook in 1995. How can we understand this consumption through the articulation of value creation and also target orientation, self-oriented versus people-oriented, extrinsic value versus intrinsic value. In that regard, maybe we could somehow compare a little bit better how do these kinds of four types of offering contrast whether you address heterosexual population, mainstream population, mixing everybody, homonormative population, and also queer population, and how we could somehow understand how this business managed to locate themselves. That's somehow my question that I'm asking. In conclusion, and that's my point, The disciplines of entrepreneurship and strategy overlook the study of SMEs targeting LGBT plus demand. Marketing is interested in this market only from the point of view of large organizations and communication and advertising companies. LGBTQ plus market reduced to a market for sexual liberation that was imagined in industrial countries in the 1970s can't be understood anymore that way, somehow. Confinement of LGBT plus entrepreneurial creativity to homonormative demand stripped off its contestation and resistance to, among other things, the pharmaceutical and tourism solution proposed by the major groups. And of course, we should somehow try to establish a cartography that would make it possible to understand the way in which LGBT plus identity is expressed in consumption today through two important notions, namely confession and identity transformation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this paper and for pointing out the silence that we all as a community need to feel. To be honest, I was struck by something at the very beginning, and I thought about it the whole presentation. So when you point out the difference between applying to an LGBT market, and so there is a slide, maybe it's like the 4th or the 5th slide, where yes, this one. Entrepreneurs who are LGBT and entrepreneurs who address LGBT market, and both. I was thinking when I saw this, what about entrepreneurs who are LGBT or aren't LGBT, but specifically employ or prefer to employ LGBTQ plus workers? Because I find this is very interesting, because what we find from the data, I don't have anything to suggest, but what we find from the data is there is a sort of clustering, as you showed, of LGBTQ plus workers within some sectors and within some companies in the sectors. So I wonder what are the dangers, the advantages of this cluster in terms of inclusion, but also what are the dangers of this cluster in terms of, dividing the village from the city. And then what I also thought about is how does this change when we compare different identities within the LGBTQ plus community? So does this change? Because for sexual, I think a lot of research, as you pointed out, is based on the experience of gay men, but nowadays we're talking more and more about different gender identities, for example. So how does this change? Maybe it's out of the scope, but this was very interesting to me to think about while you were presenting. And then something that I observe, but again, I don't have any data, is from a marketing perspective, I observe that the community is more prone to support small businesses, and this owned from people which belong to the community. And this was very interesting when you pointed out that basically all of the research is set in multinationals and big companies, because then we are losing that sense of community, of people, supporting the LGBT community through their consumption. And this is just something I observe in my personal life. I don't have any research, but I think it's a phenomenon which is spreading more and more, especially around younger generations. So consumption and the ability to move their consumption into a political intention, which is one of the two intentions that you pointed out. So thank you, it was very interesting for me.
I'm just going to comment, and I entirely share what you want. In terms of clustering, this is an important thing, and that would be also another dimension to explore, to have a more holistic approach of the ecosystem around LGBTQ plus businesses. There are a set of initiatives in France trying to create even incubators to welcome trans people and to see what's going on. It didn't work out, and I would like to write a case about it, why it didn't work out and why people didn't believe in it enough. I think as scholars we have some responsibility, because there's such a silence about what is done and what is happening that maybe it would be worse to try to go a little bit further in it. But of course, how it is an advantage, how it is a problem, this is clearly demonstrated by this failure of this initiative of creating a specific, an incubator targeting specifically these kinds of population, maybe even mixing them with other population if it's possible. So for sure. Concerning identity, of course, I didn't address it directly, but SLM as a traditional perspective is only addressing gay, maybe some lesbian issues, but the rest of the spectrum is absolutely ignored. That's why we somehow not address you, and you, but the whole thing as an holistic issue through what does it mean today, sexual liberation market, even for heterosexual people. Sorry to say even for heterosexual people, but it's true. It's important. It does mean something. Pleasure means something. We can't waste it that way, and that's very important for me. The shadow of big firms trying somehow to reappropriate what is done properly or even invest sometimes on a very genuine way is also a big concern, and there's no paper about that. It should be very interesting to explore it, very based on really important data set that we could use. I don't know how to launch those kinds of projects. For the moment, I've been working pretty much alone in that regard, even in France, I would say. But I would welcome any people who would suggest me how to orientate that. In one precedent paper, it's written in French. I've even done a sort of agenda of research, how we could organize. Also working on business history. I'm pretty much passionate about business history, and I think there are a set of papers that should be written to understand better this kind of phenomenon.
Thank you. Any questions from the house? Any comment, question?
This is a refuge. I use this old Huguenot term to illustrate, well, I'm partly Protestant too, how, this French Huguenot went to Germany or England and found a refuge there because they were severely discriminated in France. It's the same thing for entrepreneurs, LGBT entrepreneurs. My paper it's in French. There's a book chapter that was published for Routledge in English too, that is addressing that, the refuge. And I think we shouldn't reduce this phenomenon to the refuge, but the refuge is an important issue. I've coined the term, refuge. Okay? And I think we should use it also for other minority. How entrepreneurship is perceived as a refuge, but we should restrict ourselves to the study of the refuge. There should be also several kinds of studies interdisciplinary about that kind of phenomenon. Yes, a refuge. Yes. That's yes, to respect the time. Oh, sorry, I'm going to close. Thank you. Thank you. Up.
Yeah, whatever you like. I just got to find it. There it is, URM. Okay. Yeah, I tried, but it. That's,
No, that's
hang
not
on,
the paper.
that's the paper. Thank you. it? Okay, you come sit here then. Yeah, we can share. Sit there.
So I'm Judy Matthews. This is my colleague Erica French and our PhD student Lena, who unfortunately
She's stuck in Oman. She can't get out of Jordan.
there are no
because
flights.
there wasn't any flights, but then she was worried that if she came out, she might not get back, and her family is there, her children and her mum, so
Yep.
she's just too worried about coming out and not getting back to them. So
But the interesting thing about what we're presenting today is we've had an excellent systematic and bibliographic literature review. We've had a lovely conceptual paper. Today we're talking about an empirical paper that's really the result of some of her research.
yes,
And as you can see, it's about designing and implementing gender, equality, diversity initiatives. Really important steps forward in terms of how can we turn around some of those challenges.
It came out of a lot of prior research and work that she's done. So her master's was in understanding justice, the different perspectives of justice in organisations. And we were particularly interested in how gender equality and diversity initiatives, or GEDI, that's the term for it, were designed and implemented in organisations. So her PhD is case study based, 3 case studies. The first one is male-dominated organisations, the second one is female-dominated organisations, and the third case study that she's just doing now is gender-neutral organisations. Supposedly gender-neutral, but you know that that's not quite true. But that's there is a classification in Australia if there's more males in the industry, like mining, then it's male-dominated. If there's more females, like teaching or nursing, it's female-dominated. But if it's both, they're equal numbers, it's a gender-neutral organisation, but we still usually find more men at the top and more women at the bottom of things like finance, hospitality, etc. So they're the groups that we're looking at. This one is about the mining sector, and we noticed in the literature the very slow progress, even though many organisations are putting these initiatives in place. So we wanted to find out a bit more about that continued underrepresentation, and in male-dominated organisations, it's the underrepresentation of women in leadership. So that was our problem. The literature review, there's quite a bit there. We didn't put in all the references at this time, but we've got plenty of them, and I can talk to quite a few of these. So a lot of people think of gender equality and inclusion strategies as quotas, and so there's big debates about the value of quotas, as you know. And quotas can bring some immediate change in male-dominated organisations like mining, but usually at some cost, about the argument of merit and fairness. The mentorship programs have been shown to work and do support women's career advancement and access to better networking opportunities, flexible work arrangements. We did a lot of work there previous to this PhD, and we've seen that flexible work arrangements and work-life strategies are very helpful for bringing women in and out of organisations. So it's like this, backwards and forwards, in and out whenever you've got care responsibilities, but never seem to move you up. So work and life strategies as part of GEDI are not indicative of moving up into leadership. That's previous work in the literature. Organisational justice was her master's topic, and it framed employee perceptions of fairness being different from management perceptions of fairness, where employees were always considering informational and interactional justice, so being more well-informed, being communicated with each other, being part of things, whereas management seemed to think that it was about distributive and procedural justice, distributing equally, using procedures appropriately. The gap also is starting to be recognised, and really this has come out of her work more than the literature, is that GEDIs, or Gender Equality and Diversity Initiatives, are often designed by HR, but the reception and the implementation is through management and employees. And if they're not part of that design and part of that understanding of what it's trying to do, they don't use them in the right ways. And the last part is her work. Supervisors and employees consider justice differently.
And I guess this fits broadly with the whole managing with purpose. Like, what is the purpose here?
Yes.
Really, it's about improving the business as well as improving the possibilities and opportunities for across a range of processes.
Yes. So we had a number of questions. These are some. I won't read them out. You can see that we had a number of questions, and she's designed a questionnaire to deliver on managing these. So our methodology was interpretivist and constructivist. We're looking at a qualitative case studies, 3 of them. This one is one large international mining company, very large international, Australian mining company, but an international one. We had 20 semi-structured interviews, purposeful sampling with HR, line managers and employees. So 3 different types of employees, including equal numbers of men and women. We managed the content analysis through NVivo, and we also read their progress reports. Australia has a piece of unique legislation where each organisation over 100 must report biannually now, so every 2 years, on the progress that they're making on a number of major points, including pay gaps, numbers of women in all jobs, numbers of men in all jobs. They make them report on the men too now. It used to be just women, but now it's men as well. And so we were able to look at this organisation's progress reports for the last 5 years, and we were able to look at their website for what they say is their value system when it comes to equality and diversity management. The themes from her analysis are these. There's still a bit of work to do there because she's finished the female-dominated case study and we're doing the gender-balanced one, and there may end up being themes that we've left out so far that become more obvious as we look at other themes that are coming from other types of organisations. So knowledge and awareness of GEDIs was one major grouping. Who knows what about them and why? Perceptions of a GEDI, involvement in the design and implementation. How much are individuals being involved in the design and implementation? And what are people seeing as challenges? Mostly that comes to resistance, we've seen, certainly in a mining company anyway. So the findings look a little bit like this. The awareness of a GEDI, or Gender Equality and Diversity Initiative, varies by role in the organisation. So HR and managers are quite well informed, but operational staff are much less informed. So they don't really know what's going on or why, but they're the people who use it.
And are expected to use it, whereas the others, of course, are there to enforce it and put it into place.
Yes.
So there's 2 different perspectives here,
Yes, and the perception is also shaped by role. So we think that we're going to bring role theory into our evaluation more, but we've just started that. So HR sees a strategic value, employees view initiatives as quotas. So still a lot of people see it as a quota system. Women in leadership are fearful of GEDIs because they're worried about tokenism. Male employees question the fairness and merit of women moving up into leadership. Were they getting it through GEDI initiatives, or were they getting it on merit-based?
Yeah.
So still that age-old problem. Implementation was more successful where there was leadership support. That is not really a finding from ours. That is more about the individuals were saying they felt better when their own managers were communicating with them better about it. So rather than a whole lot of industries. It's only one industry, remember? So employees in operational roles were often disengaged about GDIs, and they felt we felt that disengagement was about their lack of ability to be
Involvement,
part of the
Yeah.
design
Yep,
rather than just the implementation or use. You want to?
So for discussion, I guess, thinking what's happening here? What are these things? What are the interviews telling us? And so looking at those two different areas, first of all, I guess the whole design and implementation. What was the process that was used in this particular organisation? Because later on we're looking at other organisations. Of course, it often is, perhaps not surprisingly, centralised at HR in terms of often, because you have to meet some external way of measuring this, there's often a bit of a deadline, and so often the timeline for really structured consultation hasn't been built in. So this whole disconnect maybe is not really a surprise. It's part of, as we all know, consultation takes a while. We need to listen, we need to consult, we need to take on board people's ideas, but also this whole notion of perceived effectiveness. If the participants aren't really aware of what some of the processes were and the importance of this in terms of what it contributes to the organisation, often you can see how they would discount such initiatives and really perhaps reframe what these initiatives are actually about. While the HR practitioners and managers really acknowledge the positive changes that have occurred and they are to be recognised, such as inclusive work environment, gender balance in leadership organisations, and the importance of that makes to any conversation, and in terms of how that actually produces some progress in the organisation. These operational employees aren't really part of those conversations, so they don't see that. They only really see what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And so, as Erica mentioned, this role theory may in fact help to explain some of these different perceptions. HR and the managers seeing it as a strategy, as a strategic approach in terms of how do we meet these external requirements and how do we advance our company versus employees who are on a day-to-day seeing who gets promoted and who doesn't, who gets special opportunities. So that tension is certainly there.
Yes, and we started this as a qualitative piece of work, so we weren't looking for, in designing the questionnaire, we weren't looking at specific theories to, we wanted some things to develop for us.
Yeah.
That was part of our interpretivism. But we did look at justice. We wanted to question about justice. How did people see fairness and justice? Because that was part of her master's, and that's not been included in GDI analysis in the past. So that was pretty important. So that guided our development of the questionnaire. But the rest of the theories that are coming out are going to be, we think, different in each of the different industries. So this is the male-dominated.
Case study one.
Yeah, this is case study one. So the challenges were in design and implementation. There was still a lot of resistance to GDIs. People talked about, particularly women, talked about training and communication would be a means of overcoming resistance, and that will link back to the literature. So when we do our final analysis of the 3 studies, we'll be able to link that back to the literature, because that's definitely in the literature that training and communication is going to be really important for initiative support and management support, perhaps including managers in the design and not just HR, may be helpful in ensuring that managers actually recommend specific initiatives to operatives, because they don't at the moment. And most of the operational interviews talked about the fact that their manager never talked to them about anything that was available. So they had to find out things for themselves and then ask for it.
Something they had to do rather than why they had to do it.
Yeah, so if management could be part of that walking support, it might be helpful.
Yep.
And then the last one is that justice perspectives. We'll be interested to see how the 3 studies show this. Operational staff are concerned more about communication, which is informational justice, and they're not concerned about procedural or distributive justice. That's management, more concerned about meeting requirements or meeting legislation or meeting organisational performance aspects. But the but the operational staff want to be included, want to be talked to, want to be informed, want to be, included, I think. Theoretical, our first study extends organisational justice theory into GEDI application. That's not been done before, and we'll need to do a little more. Research also highlights the importance of stakeholder-specific design, not just HR. So stakeholders being both managers who recommend and approve and operational staff who apply for GEDI is going to be important, and role theories may examine how individual behaviour is shaped by their roles in the workplace. I think there's lots. Let Judy talk about those.
And so I guess to summarise some quick ones, first of all, I guess that whole engagement in the GEDI design, I mean, who's involved? Is it just something that comes from outside, or is it something we need to customise for our company, and really what are some of the opportunities? Where can it go? This is building on really, I guess, those findings in terms of the conflicting understandings and really that conflict that's within the organisation. We do believe that stakeholders can be engaged through focus groups or feedback sessions, and I guess that's one thing that's really emerged from this because it is so strong. We also suggest avoiding that quota-only framing, because that, of course, creates an initial an understanding that really what's happening here is about quotas. It's not about performance or even economic performance of the organisation. We know there's lots of research that shows including women at many different levels actually does make a big difference in terms of how the company performs economically. So really, this whole quota-driven does actually foster scepticism and perceptions of unfairness. Perhaps that's not surprising, but it certainly is here. I guess one way of doing that would be to frame it around the capability of the organisation, the importance of inclusion and what it leads to, as well as whole notions of fairness, not just numbers. And this whole promote inclusive communication at all levels, really, right from the beginning, at all times in terms of where it's going. And so where those leaders, in terms of managers as leaders, really model those inclusive behaviour and provide that clear communication, that does actually make a difference. And that's really why we're saying these practical implications can go forward. And so, of course, we really acknowledge that there are limitations. This is the first of 3 studies. It's actually one specific area of male-dominated organisations. Of course, in Australia, there are many mining companies, so really perhaps we're not saying it applies to all mining companies, but it's really good to start with one in particular. Being a single case study, of course, limits generalisability. It's really about a theoretical generalisability rather than saying this exists in all organisations. But there's certainly implications for future work, and I guess that's really what we're wanting to look at in terms of how the whole design process has happened with this PhD, and really wanting to look at what clear strategies and increased communication can actually enhance the effectiveness in this particular case study in male-dominated sectors, but realising and hopefully over time looking at what's going to happen across those 3 different sectors.
And we have finished the analysis of the female-dominated. It was teachers, and the findings are quite different. It's not about communication there, but it's going to be about other things. So
That's another paper.
yeah, that's that's one still to be written, and then we're halfway through the interviews for the next one, which is bank.
Yeah. So it was really
Finance.
important to us that we could present some of
Yeah.
Lena's research here, given that she couldn't come.
Yes,
through.
and we thank your team for helping us, because first of all we were told we couldn't present it, so that it had to get cancelled, and then they allowed us to present it with Judy as the major presenter. So we're grateful to you for putting it in this morning, and so's Lena, so I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. I really like this case study. I don't have much to add, to be honest, because it sparked my interest in particular in finding out maybe next year what the differences are now between the female-dominated one and the male-dominated one. And especially if dynamics for women in mining, this was one of my questions for this paper as well, are different than the dynamics for women in other male-dominated sectors. So how, how can we extend the results to other sectors, or if they can extend for men in female-dominated. So this is your second paper, so we'll hear about it, I'm sure.
I'm just going to type this up so I can send it to Lena. So.
And this is not working, but okay, yes. And then one of the question is, often you refer to operational staff in general. So I was curious to know if when you consider operational staff, you find differences between genders. Because, for example, when you say operational staffs were less informed about GADI, I wonder, like, is it for all genders? Or is it like men because they're not interested and it's different for women? And then the same happens when you talk about justice perspective and you say that there's a difference between the emphasis on justice of the management and the emphasis on employees. And because I did some research on gender and on the same topic, but I didn't divide between manager and employees, but between genders, I see a similar pattern with gender. So that's why I was wondering, like, maybe for women, some elements of justice are more important than they are for men. And maybe because men are usually in management, especially male-dominated field, that's why, maybe that's connected. That's it. Those are the points. It was very interesting, and hopefully we'll hear about it again.
Yep, I'm just typing that up. Sorry. Yes, I think that they're good things for us to think about, particularly when we join the three studies together and we look at the differences between men and women on justice in different industry sectors, because we think that industry is a pretty big variable context-wise for GDIs. So that was the start of this PhD, which she's hoping to finish by the end of the year. It's a big ask when she's just finishing the third one now, so we'll see what we can achieve. Might be stuck in Amman for a while, so it's going to be...
That's really good.
I've got those notes, so I appreciate that.
Please.
Yeah.
Please. Yep.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think you're onto something, and I think that's why we looked at industry differences, because of course there's culture in those industry differences. And last year I presented a paper here at URM about engineering, and it's a male-dominated area, engineering and construction companies, and it's just been published. And one of our big three is culture. One of our big three findings was the culture of, and we looked at 5 different organisations, and culture was culture and structure, because your culture and your structure give you that those procedures and that, what was the other one I said? Procedure and...
Procedural justice and distributive justice.
Distributive, sorry.
Yeah.
Your culture and your structure give you distribution and procedures. So that's what managers want to go with all the time. So they see justice as distributive and procedural. Now, that's what your structure and your culture gives you in an industry. And the operational staff or the construction and engineering staff, the project management staff, they saw that as they wanted more information and more communication. So, yeah, so I think your context, or what I call context and you're calling culture, is the same thing that we're talking about, that there's going to be this big industry influence based on structure and culture. So, yeah. It seems to get used a lot to justify why we do things around here that way. Yeah. All right. Yes.
Definitely.
Yes, there's the Equal Opportunity or Women in the Workplace Act. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, but it's what we're noticing, it's very easy to comply under your structure and culture. This is the way we do things around here, so we'll implement something, but it's not quite, it doesn't actually do anything.
That's
what we're
problem.
trying to investigate,
Yeah.
that it's what we've been coming up with before this study, these 3 studies that we're doing, we've been coming up with this idea of exactly what you're talking about, the culture and structure of the organisation and its industry, which is helpful to look at organisational theory, because organisations inside an industry copy each other. This is how it's done in this industry. So there's a lot of that that you're talking about. And we've also found that leadership is a really big thing. The leaders being able to walk and talk the activity is better. And not very many do that. They sort of go, oh, well, we think we know what a GEDI should look like, so here's one, go work it. And they don't use it themselves, they don't walk the talk, they don't encourage people to use it, so it just withers on the vine, so
Yeah,
to
it's
speak.
something you have to do,
Yeah,
but without
so-
a lot of investment.
Yeah, so we are finding structure and culture to be an industry sector to be a pretty big thing.
And legislation helps, but it's not the whole story.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a good starting point, but it doesn't help moving along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you very much for
Thank
helping
you,
us.
and thank you for your suggestions. Really appreciate that. And Eliana?
All my 3 presenters here, and thank you. Are you presenting next? Yeah, I'll see you there. See you there.
Yeah, concerning the I'm a scholar really based on motivation. I've been writing so much on that, especially in entrepreneurship. But for all people, there's a big issue, and I'm ready to do some research on that with a group of people in France. When you finish or you terminate your career, what are your, how can I say, stimulations in order to foresee yourself in the next 10 or 15 years. Is there any
Sì,
literature on that?
prova.
People that manage to project themselves.
Sì,
Don't project yourself. Yeah.
prova. 1, 2, 3, prova. 1, 2, 3, prova. 1, 2, 3, prova.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. What would be, for example, would there be some transversal competencies you should develop for joining an elderly home or joining an elderly community? I don't know, like, is there any kinds of first initiative and then possibility to understand what's happening and how we can
Prova.
stimulate or reorientate motivation?
Prova.
Exactly, exactly. Because I think there's really not so much into literature. I leave you my card because that's really something.
So much. So you are not just a name on a paper in the literature. You are a living
Motivation.
study.
Motivation is the most important thing, and that has been a consistent discussion. Well, especially now.
Prova sì, prova collegamento, sì.
There are 60 people, but half of them are more than 55. Of course, have this kind of issues concerning their motivation. Is it a motivation to terminate something, or is it a motivation of motivation? And that's just drop me a brief
Prova.
mail and I will ask you a set of questions for the literature especially, and I will
Prova sì, 1, 2, 3, prova. 1, 2, 3, prova. Sì, prova. Prova audio, prova 1, 2, 3, prova 1, 2, 1, 2, prova, sì, 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 3, 4.
Abstract
Yes.
of my project,
Yes,
Lisa.
yes, 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 yes. To see if there's anything on motivation. Okay,
Lisa.
okay. Lisa, no, like it's really important. It's very, very important. And I know that, for example, as far as I've seen, that's for example how women do support other women when they get age at work, or men support other men, how there are same gender issues or whatever, or heterogender issues. There's plenty of very interesting to research, and it's really, really, really important. I think, like otherwise. I think we're going to go in the wrong directions. That's true. I'm from ESCE. It's a grande école in France.
Oui,
Paris, La Défense. It's really it's not that far. So let's discuss about that at some point. Because when they asked me, I said like, but aging, I don't know. Motivation, I know, but like, and then I start a little bit of reading, and I say, like, I'd better study a little bit more before we launch this kind of project. But I think it's super important. I'd like to do it into a gender-neutral sector to see how people manage to see it, especially in innovation and technology, because people maybe think that they can become consultant maybe after the retirement.
yes, of course, this is normal also in Italy.
That's impossible.
Many people, yeah.
But in other sector, when they don't have any other consulting, how can we help to find new issues? And I think policy and legislation too around that. Like,
Yes, you are quite right.
otherwise, you go and your only motivation is to of termination. I don't know, but philosophically, it's like wow, like, and I can see it when we had set of colleague. Well, I'm 58. I'm not that young, but like there's some moment
You
I
are
say,
young. I'm a granny. For
Yeah,
instance.
I'm a
So
grand
I'm
uncle.
very old.
But you know, in that regard, somehow, what is